Do you really think you deserve this spot? Richard Thornton's voice echoed through the Thornton Industries parking lot as he watched Miguel Santos pushing his rusty bike towards the corporate building. Look, you can't even buy a decent car. Miguel stopped, took a deep breath, and slowly turned to face the billionaire CEO who had just mocked him in front of a dozen executives who had just arrived for the morning meeting. It was his first day as International Logistics Manager, a position achieved after months of rigorous selection process. "Good morning, Mr. Thornton," replied Miguel with a disturbing calm, holding tightly to the handlebars of the bicycle that took him daily the 15 kilometers between his home and office. At 34 years old, the son of Filipino immigrants who worked in meat processing plants, Miguel Santos never imagined that his first day at one of the largest foreign trade companies in the United States would begin with public humiliation. Thornton took a few steps toward Miguel, his $3,000 Italian shoes contrasting sharply with the new employee's worn sneakers. "You know what? I have a better idea for you." He turned to his personal driver. "James, get that old bike my son left in the garage, the pink one with the training wheels." Nervous laughter arose among the executives present. Some looked away, clearly uncomfortable, but no one said anything. At Thornton Industries, Richard was known for his explosive temper and tendency to fire anyone who crossed him. "Richard, that's unnecessary," muttered Catherine Walsh, HR director, but her voice was immediately silenced by an icy glare from the CEO. "Unnecessary? On the contrary, I'm being generous." Thornton crossed his arms, pleased with his own cruelty. "After all, we can't have our new manager arriving in such a scrap. What kind of image does that send to our international clients?" Miguel remained motionless, his eyes fixed on Thornton with an intensity that made the billionaire hesitate for a split second. There was something in that look, a disturbing serenity, as if Miguel was seeing something that no one else could see. 5 minutes later, James returned pushing a hot pink children's bicycle, completely unsuitable for an adult, with cartoon character stickers and side wheels still attached. The humiliation was complete. "There, now you have a transport worthy of your level." Thornton laughed loudly, turning to the executives who accompanied him. "See, folks, this is the kind of diversity HR is so insistent on hiring. They can barely afford a car, but they want to manage million-dollar operations." "Excuse me, Mr. Thornton." Miguel's voice cut through the air with an unexpected firmness. "I will accept your generous offer." Everyone was shocked. Thornton expected anger, tears, or at the very least an immediate dismissal. But Miguel simply took the pink bicycle, left his own against the wall, and started walking towards the entrance of the building, pushing that nonsense on wheels. "Thank you for the warm welcome," Miguel said without looking back. "I'm sure it will be a professional, memorable relationship." As Miguel disappeared through the skyscraper's glass doors, Catherine Walsh watched the confused expression on Thornton's face. She had reviewed Miguel's resume personally, graduated with honors in international logistics from UCLA, MBA from the Wharton School, fluent in 6 languages, with experience in multinational companies on 3 continents. And there was something else in his file, a confidential note about a special project he had developed over the past 2 years, something about optimizing trade routes that had caught the attention of important investors. Catherine wondered if Thornton had actually read the resume of the man he had just publicly humiliated. Inside the elevator, alone for the first time since that humiliating morning, Miguel allowed himself a small smile as he touched the inside pocket of his jacket, feeling the outline of the flash drive he carried with him. 2 years of meticulous work, thorough documentation, carefully cultivated strategic connections. All ready, everything waiting for the right moment. "Welcome to Thornton Industries, Miguel," he whispered to himself as the elevator doors closed. "You have no idea what's coming." In the parking lot, as the executives dispersed uncomfortably to their offices, Richard Thornton glanced at the rusty bicycle abandoned against the wall. For a brief moment, something bothered his conscience. The way Miguel had accepted the humiliation without reacting, that almost imperceptible smile on the corner of his lips. But the billionaire, he quickly dismissed the thought. After all, he was Richard Thornton, owner of a $400 million empire. What could a Filipino immigrant on a bicycle do to him? It would be exactly this arrogance that would destroy him. If you're enjoying this story of how a cruel act turned into the biggest mistake of an arrogant millionaire's life, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because what Miguel Santos had on that flash drive was about to shake the foundations of Thornton Industries in a way that no one, absolutely no one, could have predicted. Miguel's office on the 12th floor was tiny, a desk cramped between the archive and the conference room, no window, with a chair that creaked with every movement. Catherine Walsh had quietly apologized as she showed the space. "It's temporary," she said, avoiding his gaze. "Once we reorganize the departments, it's perfect," replied Miguel, placing his worn backpack on the table. "Privacy is exactly what I need." Over the next few days, the pink bike humiliation became the official joke of Thornton Industries. Someone had taken a photo and shared it in the company's internal group. Laughter echoed through the hallways whenever Miguel passed by. "Look, here comes the pink manager," shouted Derek Manning, director of sales, during lunch in the executive cafeteria. His table, surrounded by the other directors, erupted in laughter. "Hey, Santos, do you need help pedaling back home? I can borrow my training wheels." Miguel simply nodded, picked up his lunchbox, and sat alone in the far corner of the cafeteria. That homemade food, rice, beans, and chicken that his mother insisted on preparing every morning, contrasted brutally with the expensive lunches that executives ordered from sophisticated restaurants. "Pathetic," Thornton muttered to Manning, loud enough for Miguel to hear. "I bet HR was filling a diversity quota. They probably don't even have the real qualifications to be here." What none of them knew was that at that exact moment, Miguel had 3 different systems open on his notebook: the company's internal logistics database, a private spreadsheet with complex trade route calculations, and an encrypted folder containing documents that would make Thornton's empire collapse like a house of cards. In the second week, things got worse. Thornton called a general management meeting and deliberately did not include Miguel on the guest list. When Miguel showed up anyway, after all, he was an international logistics manager and the meeting would discuss exactly his area, Thornton pretended to be surprised. "Oh, Santos, I didn't expect you here." The CEO looked around the room, making sure everyone paid attention to the humiliation he was about to dish out. "But since you're here, how about explaining to us why transportation costs increased by 17% last quarter?" Miguel took a deep breath. He had only started 2 weeks ago. That increase had occurred in the last 6 months, under the management of the previous manager. "Mr. Thornton, I took over the position. Excuses don't pay the bills, Santos." Thornton crossed his arms, satisfied. "Maybe if you spent less time riding your pink bike and more time working, our company wouldn't be bleeding money." Nervous laughter filled the room. Catherine Walsh closed her eyes, clearly mortified. But nobody said anything. No one ever said anything when Thornton decided to humiliate someone. "Actually," Miguel's voice cut through the ensuing silence, "I have analyzed the transportation contracts for the last 18 months. If you will allow me 15 minutes tomorrow, I can present a plan that would reduce these costs by 23%. The room fell silent. Thornton narrowed his eyes suspiciously. "You have 2 weeks left and you think you can fix something that our experienced directors couldn't?" "I don't think so. I'm sure." Miguel kept his gaze steady. "Because I spent the last 2 years studying exactly these routes, these fares, these contracts. That's why I was hired." Thornton gave a short, dry laugh. "Right. Thursday, 9 in the morning. You have your 15 minutes of fame, Santos, and when you fail spectacularly in front of everyone, I will personally walk you out the door." That night, Miguel worked until 3 in the morning in the tiny apartment he shared with his mother and 2 younger brothers. Rosa Santos entered the room at 2 o'clock, finding her son surrounded by papers, calculators, and 3 laptops open simultaneously. "Miguel, son, you're going to kill yourself working like that." She placed a cup of coffee next to him. "That man doesn't deserve so much of your time." "It's not about Thornton, Mom." Miguel looked at her, his eyes red with exhaustion but shining with determination. "It's for us, for every family that worked in meatpacking plants, that cleaned rich people's bathrooms, that heard jokes about accents, about food, about us not being real Americans." Rosa touched her son's face tenderly. "You were always different from other boys. Even as a child when others played, you watched, thought, planned. Remember when the landlord tried to evict us unfairly?" Miguel smiled for the first time in days. "I was 12 and spent a week at the public library studying rental laws. When I brought up the city codes he was violating, we never had a problem again. And look where that got you." Rosa pointed to the scattered documents. "But be careful, son. Men like this Thornton, they don't like to lose, especially to someone they don't think should be on the same level as them." Miguel nodded slowly. "I know, Mom. That's why I need to be perfect, not just good, perfect." Thursday's presentation was an absolute success. Miguel demonstrated, with irrefutable data and meticulous analysis, how Thornton Industries was paying surcharges on virtually all international routes. He had identified loopholes in contracts, poorly executed negotiations, and completely ignored opportunities. His plan would not only reduce costs by 23%, it would potentially save the company $4 million in the next fiscal year. The directors were stunned. Catherine Walsh smiled broadly. Even Derek Manning, who had spent weeks mocking Miguel, seemed impressed. But Thornton was furious. "Interesting," he said coldly when Miguel finished. "Very interesting that you, a new employee, have access to detailed information about our confidential contracts." The mood in the room changed instantly. "I was given authorized access by the HR department." Miguel replied calmly, but something cold began to form in his stomach. Authorized? Thornton stood up, his voice rising. You dug into confidential company files. Who knows who you're selling this information to? Our competitors? Richard, this is absurd. Catherine began to protest, but was interrupted. Silence, Thornton pointed to Miguel. Security. Escort Mr. Santos out immediately, and someone call our lawyers. I want this man investigated for corporate espionage. Espionage? Miguel remained seated calmly. Interesting accusation, Mr. Thornton, especially considering all the documents I used are in the shared management system, available to anyone with manager credentials. Like me. 2 security guards entered the room hesitantly. Didn't you hear? Get him out of here. That's when Miguel did something unexpected. He smiled. Not a nervous or defensive smile. A genuine, almost relieved smile, as if something he'd been waiting for had finally happened. May I ask you a question before you leave, Mr. Thornton? Miguel's voice was strangely calm. Have you heard of the Whistleblower Protection Act of 2021? Or the federal regulations on retaliation against employees who expose wrongdoing? Thornton froze. Something in Miguel's tone, in the unshakable confidence of those words, made the CEO hesitate. What are you talking about? Miguel opened his briefcase and took out a sealed envelope, placing it on the conference table. This is a copy. The original has already been sent by certified mail this morning to the Department of Justice, the Securities and Exchange Commission, and 3 law firms specializing in class actions. The silence in the room was absolute. Catherine Walsh stood up slowly, her eyes wide. You only saw my transportation cost analysis, Miguel continued, his voice still calm but carrying an intensity that made everyone in the room lean forward. What you didn't see was the second part of my research, the one about the 3 shell subsidiaries Mr. Thornton created over the last 4 years to embezzle company funds, or the fraudulent contracts with non-existent suppliers, or the $10 million in unreported taxes. Thornton's face went from red to white in a matter of seconds. You have no proof of anything. Yes, I have. Miguel touched the inside pocket of his jacket, where the flash drive had always been. Spreadsheets, bank statements, emails between you and your accountants, recordings of phone conversations about how to hide the deviations, all meticulously documented over the last 24 months. Do you know how I did it? Because before I was officially hired, I spent 2 years working as a temporary external consultant for your company. You didn't even remember me. Just another Filipino doing manual data analysis work. Invisible. Esquecable. The look of horror on Thornton's face was almost comical. You were the one who gave me complete access to the company's systems. Miguel continued, slowly standing up. You who asked for detailed reports on each financial transaction. You who, in your arrogance, never imagined that the temporary assistant would be paying attention to the numbers that didn't add up, the suspicious patterns, the transfers that disappeared. Derek Manning was pale. Richard, is that true? Of course not. He's bluffing. But Thornton's voice was shaking. Miguel slowly walked towards the door, the security guards automatically clearing the way. He stopped in the doorway, turning around one last time. Next Thursday at 10 in the morning, there's a meeting scheduled at the federal prosecutor's office. I'll be there. My lawyers will be there. And you guys? He looked directly at Thornton. You'll wish you'd never given me that pink bike. As Miguel left the room in absolute silence, Catherine Walsh opened the envelope he had left on the table. His hands shook as he read the first few pages of the 67-page document, systematically detailing every financial irregularity committed by Richard Thornton over the past 4 years. My God, she whispered. He has everything. Absolutely everything. Thornton slumped in his chair, the weight of reality finally hitting his privileged consciousness. That Filipino he had publicly humiliated, openly mocked, treated like dirt, was not a helpless victim. He was the worst nightmare a corporate criminal could have, a financial logistics expert with 2 years of documented evidence and nothing to lose. And the most terrifying? The absolute calm with which Miguel had revealed all of this, as if every humiliation, every cruel joke, every public slight had been exactly what he expected, as if Thornton had followed a script written long ago, without even realizing he was being led straight to his own destruction. On the street, pushing his ridiculous pink bicycle in the late afternoon sun, Miguel Santos finally allowed himself a genuine smile. The flash drive in the inside pocket contained more than evidence of financial crimes. It also contained every racist email Thornton had exchanged with other executives, every promotion systematically denied to non-white employees, every derogatory comment recorded in internal evaluations. Federal justice would deal with crimes. But Miguel had much more far-reaching plans for the complete destruction of Richard Thornton, and it had all started with a pink children's bicycle and the arrogance of a man who never imagined that the invisible could be watching his every move. In the 3 days following the conference room explosion, Thornton Industries went into absolute damage containment mode. Corporate lawyers occupied the entire 15th floor. Catherine Walsh was placed on voluntary administrative leave, and Richard Thornton simply disappeared from the office. Miguel continued working normally in his tiny cubicle between the archive and the meeting room, pushing his pink bike every morning under the confused looks of colleagues who didn't know exactly what had happened on that explosive Thursday. Saints. Derek Manning's voice intercepted him in the hallway the following Monday. The sales director who had spent weeks mocking him now looked visibly uncomfortable. Look, about those bike jokes. I didn't know that. Didn't know what, Derek? Miguel stopped, calmly turning around. Didn't you know I was a human being who deserved basic respect? Or didn't you know I had information that could bring down your boss? Manning swallowed. I'm just sorry, man. Really. You're not apologizing to me because you regret it, Derek. You're apologizing because you're afraid now. Miguel adjusted his backpack on his shoulders. But I accept it, because unlike you, I don't define people just by their worst moments. As he walked towards the elevator, Miguel felt the weight of the flash drive in his pocket. What he had revealed in the conference room was just the tip of the iceberg. The ghost subsidiaries, the embezzlement of funds, the evaded taxes, all meticulously documented, but there was something more, something he had saved specifically for the right moment. The meeting with Marcus Chen took place in a discreet cafe 3 blocks from Thornton Industries. Chen was an investigative reporter for the Financial Tribune, known for his devastating exposés on corporate corruption. He had won 2 Pulitzer Prizes by destroying corrupt corporate giants. Are you sure about this? Chen studied the documents Miguel had printed out, his eyebrows rising progressively with each page. This isn't just tax fraud. It's a systematic conspiracy involving at least 6 other companies. I know. Miguel took a sip of cheap coffee. Thornton didn't work alone. He had a whole network of executives at different corporations, all facilitating fraudulent contracts for each other, inflating costs, diverting public resources from government programs. Chen whistled softly. How many people know this? Besides me, Thornton and his 5 partners. Now you, and on Thursday the federal prosecutor. Miguel leaned forward. But I want you to publish it first. I want it so that when Thornton walks into that room on Thursday, he's already completely publicly exposed. Why do this? Chen closed the folder, studying Miguel with genuine curiosity. You already have enough evidence to destroy him legally. Why the public humiliation too? Miguel was silent for a long moment, his fingers tracing the outline of the coffee cup. Because men like Richard Thornton believe they are untouchable, that they can humiliate, exploit, and destroy people they consider inferior without consequences. He gave me that pink bike thinking he was putting me in my place. And where do you belong? Asked Chen softly. Exactly where I choose to be. Miguel smiled for the first time in the conversation. And right now I choose to be on the outside, watching as his empire crumbles piece by piece. The story was published on Tuesday morning, taking over the full front page of the Financial Tribune with the devastating headline, "MPL of Frauds, How Billionaire CEO Stole Millions While Mocking Immigrant Employees." The photo chosen was particularly brutal. Thornton giving that arrogant laugh while handing the pink bike to Miguel, captured by an employee and leaked anonymously to the newspaper. Below, a detailed infographic showing the flow of money diverted through shell subsidiaries. Miguel was in his cubicle when the siren started. 3 FBI vehicles parked in front of the building at 9:15 in the morning. Federal agents entered the main lobby carrying search and seizure warrants. All areas of the 15th floor are locked down until further notice, an agent announced over the building's intercom. No one enters or leaves without federal authorization. The office went into complete panic. Executives frantically tried to delete emails, shred documents, make desperate calls to lawyers, but it was too late. Miguel had ensured that digital copies of everything were already in the possession of the authorities since the previous Friday. Derek Manning walked past Miguel's cubicle, pale as a sheet. "They're arresting Thornton," he whispered in disbelief. "Now, handcuffed, in front of everyone." Miguel didn't respond. He simply continued typing his weekly logistics report as if it were just another normal day at work. That's when his cell phone rang. Unknown number. "Hello? You destroyed everything." Richard Thornton's voice was unrecognizable, hoarse, desperate, brittle. 15 years of building this company. My reputation, my family, all destroyed because of one stupid bike joke. Miguel closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. It wasn't because of the bike, Mr. Thornton. It was because of the 4 years of stealing millions. It was because of every black Filipino Latino employee you systematically prevented from being promoted. It was because of every racist comment you made thinking there would be no consequences. "I can pay you." Thornton's voice now bordered on panic. "How much do you want? 5 million? 10? I have offshore accounts that the FBI doesn't know about." "You just added another federal charge to your list." Miguel interrupted calmly. "Attempted witness bribery. This call is being recorded and will be turned over to federal agents in approximately," he glanced at his watch, "45 seconds when they arrive at your office." Absolute silence on the other side. Then one click. Thornton had hung up. Miguel saved the recording, attached it to the already written email addressed to the federal agent responsible for the case, and pressed send. 42 seconds later, through the thin walls of his cubicle, he heard screams coming from the 15th floor. Catherine Walsh showed up at his door 2 hours later. Her eyes were red, but she maintained the professional composure that characterized her. "The board of directors has asked me to temporarily take over as interim CEO," she said, her voice carefully controlled. "The first thing I need to do is a thorough cleanup. Identify everyone who was involved in or facilitated Thornton's behavior." "Good luck," Miguel replied sincerely. "No," Catherine shook her head. "I didn't come to ask for advice, Hose. I've come to offer you the position of Vice President of International Operations. Starting salary of $350,000 per year, plus performance bonuses. Own office on the 14th floor. Team of 15 people under management." Miguel blinked, surprised for the first time in weeks. Why? "Because in 2 years as an invisible temporary consultant you systematically identified every operational flaw in this company. Because you meticulously documented evidence that our own internal auditors, paid a fortune, never found. And because," Catherine smiled ruefully, "you did all this while being treated like dirt, and yet you kept your integrity intact. I need to think, of course, but, Miguel," Catherine stopped at the door, "regardless of your decision about the position, I want you to know something. I should have stood up for you when Thornton humiliated you in the parking lot. I saw it, I knew it was wrong, and I did nothing. That cowardice embarrasses me more than anything in my career. So thank you for having the courage I didn't have." That night, Miguel pushed his pink bike through the streets of Los Angeles, watching the sunset turn the skyscrapers orange and gold. His phone was constantly vibrating, journalists wanting interviews, lawyers offering free representation for civil cases against Thornton, even a documentary production company interested in telling his story. But the message that really mattered came from his mother. "Son, I saw it in the newspaper. Your father would be very proud. Come home for dinner. I made your favorite rice." Rosa Santos didn't fully understand the complex financial details of what her son had done, but I fully understood the significance of seeing a black Filipino from the suburbs take down a corrupt billionaire CEO using only intelligence, patience, and an unwavering determination to do the right thing. In the tiny apartment he shared with his family, surrounded by his 2 younger brothers who bombarded him with excited questions about, "When are they going to make a film about you?" Miguel finally allowed himself to relax for the first time in 2 years. But there was one last card to play, something he had saved specifically for the perfect moment. And that moment was coming. Because while everyone believed that Miguel's revenge against Thornton was complete, he knew the truth. The CEO's downfall was just the beginning. The true final blow, the one that would ensure that men like Richard Thornton would think twice before humiliating someone they considered inferior, was yet to come. And when it arrived, it would be absolutely devastating. At Thornton's Beverly Hills mansion, the man who 3 weeks ago had mocked an employee for riding a bicycle now sat alone in his private office, surrounded by court notices, resignation letters from lawyers refusing to represent him, and newspaper headlines systematically destroying his reputation. His wife had left with the children to go to her parents' house. His friends at the golf club no longer answered his calls. The board of directors of the company he had built had voted unanimously to permanently oust him, and all because of a Filipino on a bicycle who he had completely underestimated. Thornton grabbed his laptop, typed the name, Miguel Santos, into Google, and finally, too late, did the research he should have done before hiring this man. Page after page of academic articles on corporate fraud and logistics optimization, lectures at international conferences, a LinkedIn profile showing connections with federal prosecutors, investigative journalists, and employment discrimination lawyers. "My God," whispered Thornton, reality finally penetrating his arrogance. He planned this from the beginning. The worst was yet to come, but at that moment Thornton still didn't know exactly how deeply he had been deceived, manipulated, and destroyed by a man he had deemed unworthy of basic respect. The full truth about Miguel's plan, and the final revelation that would transform this case into legend within corporate justice circles, was just 3 days away from being exposed to the world. And when that happened, Richard Thornton would realize that every humiliation, every cruel joke, every moment of disrespect had been carefully documented, not just as legal evidence, but as ammunition for destruction so complete and utter that he would become a case study in the inevitable consequences of arrogance fueled by privilege and prejudice. The pink bike was still in the Thornton Industries parking lot, leaning right where Miguel had left it on the first day. No one dared touch her. It had become something of an unofficial monument, a silent reminder that underestimating someone's base based on appearances, social class, or ethnicity was the most dangerous mistake anyone in a position of power could make. Because sometimes, the person you publicly humiliate is not a helpless victim. Sometimes it's the architect of its own destruction, patiently waiting for you to provide all the tools it needs to dismantle its empire piece by piece. The Thursday of the meeting with the federal prosecutor dawned with a storm over Los Angeles. Miguel arrived at the federal building at 9 in the morning, accompanied by his mother Rosa and his 2 younger brothers. It wasn't necessary for them to be there, but he insisted. I wanted them to see the end of the story that had started years ago. In the lobby, a small crowd was already gathering. Reporters, cameras, journalists from at least 8 different outlets. Marcus Chen's report had triggered a media frenzy. Billionaire CEO arrested for fraud was the headline on every channel. Mr. Santos, a statement? Shouted a reporter, thrusting a microphone toward her. Miguel waved politely but didn't stop. I had work to do. The conference room on the 11th floor was packed. Federal Attorney James Morrison, 3 FBI agents, 2 Securities and Exchange Commission attorneys, and Catherine Walsh, representing Thornton Industries. And sitting in the farthest possible corner, pale as paper, was Richard Thornton, accompanied by 2 extremely expensive lawyers who looked deeply concerned. Good morning, everyone, Morrison began formally. We are here to discuss allegations of tax fraud, money laundering, and embezzlement of corporate funds against Mr. Richard Thornton and potentially other executives of Thornton Industries. Miguel opened his briefcase, taking out a tablet and connecting it to the room's projector. On the big screen, a complex organizational chart appeared showing the flow of money through 6 different companies over 4 years. Gentlemen, what you are seeing is the complete map of the operation. Miguel pointed to the first subsidiary. Delta Corp Holdings, registered in the Cayman Islands, was created in March 2021, ostensibly a legitimate consulting firm. In reality, an empty shell used to inflate costs for non-existent services. Click to the next slide. Detailed bank statements, international transfers, SWIFT codes, everything meticulously organized. Thornton created fake contracts with Delta Corp, approved payments of $500,000 to $800,000 for strategic consulting, and that money simply disappeared into offshore accounts. Miguel turned to face Thornton directly. Except it didn't disappear, did it, Mr. Thornton? It went exactly to your personal account at Credit Suisse in Zurich. Thornton's face was scarlet. This is absurd. You don't have access. Yes, I have, Miguel interrupted calmly. Because you gave it to me. Remember when you hired that Filipino temp consultant in 2023 to do data analysis? The one you wouldn't even look in the eye? The one you treated like invisible furniture while you openly discussed fraudulent transactions in front of him? The silence in the room was absolute. You gave me full access credentials to the company's financial system. You asked for detailed reports on every transaction over $100,000, and I delivered those reports exactly every week. Miguel smiled coldly. What you didn't realize was that I was also doing my own analysis, identifying patterns, tracking money, documenting every irregularity. Morrison leaned forward, fascinated. Continue, Mr. Santos. But Delta Corp was just the first layer. Miguel quickly clicked through the next 5 slides. Apex Solutions, Meridian Consulting, TechBridge International, each registered in different tax havens, each running the same scheme, and all with the same 3 signatories on the incorporation documents. Richard Thornton, Derek Manning, and James Whitmore. Catherine Walsh turned visibly pale when she heard Whitmore's name. He was the company's CFO, Thornton's trusted man for 15 years. Over the course of 4 years, Miguel continued methodically, you embezzled approximately $17 million, not just from profits, but from employee pension funds, from contracts with legitimate suppliers that you paid with bouncing checks, from government programs designed to support small businesses. Lies, exploded Thornton, standing up abruptly. He's making it up. Sit down, Mr. Thornton, ordered Morrison coldly. Miguel opened a new folder on the tablet. But do you know what else I found? Something much more interesting than simple financial fraud. Clicked on the file. Emails appeared. Dozens of them. Hundreds. Correspondence between Mr. Thornton and 5 other CEOs of competing companies, coordinating prices, dividing markets, eliminating smaller competitors through illegal predatory practices. Miguel read directly from an email dated May 18, 2024. We need to ensure that none of these immigrants build businesses strong enough to compete with us. Keep the contracts between our circle. The younger FBI agent let out a low whistle. This is cartelization, direct violation of the Sherman Antitrust Act. Exactly. Miguel clicked through more documents. And there's more. contracts with city inspectors to approve construction that violated safety codes, bribes to customs officials to facilitate undeclared imports, a systematic network of corruption involving at least 47 individuals in public and private positions. One of Thornton's lawyers whispered something urgently in his ear. The CEO shook his head violently, but his expression was one of pure terror. How did you manage all this? Asked Morrison, genuinely impressed. Patience. Miguel leaned on the table. 2 years of observing, listening, being invisible. Do you know what the superpower is of people like me? People who people like Thornton consider irrelevant? We have become transparent. You say everything in front of us because you don't even register our human presence. He turned back to Thornton, and for the first time since the meeting began, he allowed real anger to shine through his voice. You gave me a pink bicycle in front of everyone. You laughed at my poverty. You made fun of my ethnicity. You made fun of the fact that I didn't have a car. Miguel took a step towards the man who had tried to completely humiliate him. But do you know what you actually did that day? It gave me absolute motivation to ensure that every second of the last 2 years of meticulous documentation was turned over to the proper authorities. I can explain everything, Thornton began, desperately. It cannot, Morrison cut in. Mr. Thornton, based on the evidence presented today and combined with what we have already gathered in the last 5 days since your initial arrest, I am formally expanding the charges against you to include conspiracy, cartelization, bribery of public officials, and money laundering on an international scale. You are under arrest again, this time without the possibility of bail. The 2 FBI agents stood up simultaneously. Thornton instinctively backed away. No, you guys don't understand. I built that company. You stole from that company, Catherine Walsh interrupted softly, but her voice cut like a blade. He stole from employees who trusted his leadership with their retirement savings. He stole from families who depended on honest wages. And while he stole, he still found time to humiliate those he considered inferior. Handcuffs were placed on Richard Thornton's wrists for the second time in a week. This time, the reality of what was happening finally penetrated his privileged arrogance. His legs gave way. Please, I have a family, children. I have a family too. Miguel's voice was steel. A mother who worked 16 hours a day in meatpacking plants to give me an education. 2 brothers who never had half the opportunities their children have. And you laughed at that family. You laughed at our struggle. You thought we were a joke. Thornton was led out of the room, his expensive lawyers following helplessly behind. When the door closed, Morrison reached out to Miguel. Mr. Santos, I rarely see such meticulous documentation in such complex cases. Would you consider working as a consultant for the FBI on corporate fraud cases? Miguel smiled for the first time at the meeting. Thank you, but I have a job offer to consider. Vice President of International Operations, remember? Catherine nodded in confirmation. And I sincerely hope you accept. Outside, reporters surrounded Miguel the moment he left the building. Cameras flashing, microphones pushed, questions shouted simultaneously. Mr. Santos, how do you feel now that Thornton has been arrested? Is it true that he humiliated you with a children's bicycle? Did you plan everything from the beginning? Miguel stopped on the steps of the federal building, his mother and brothers at his side. Rosa held his hand tightly, pride beaming in her eyes. I didn't plan the humiliation, Miguel replied calmly. But when it came, I decided it wouldn't go to waste. Men like Richard Thornton operate under the belief that they can treat people like disposable objects without consequences. He miscalculated, because sometimes the person you humiliate is the very person who has the tools, the intelligence, and the determination to expose everything you've hidden. What message do you have for other workers who experience discrimination? Asked Marcus Chen, his notebook open to record every word. Miguel thought carefully before responding. Document everything. Every offensive email, every discriminatory comment, every wrongdoing you witness. Not out of revenge, Poe, but because justice requires evidence. And when your time comes to act, do it with intelligence, not anger. Cameras captured the moment Rosa Santos hugged her son right there on the steps of the federal courthouse, tears streaming freely down her face as reporters across the country broadcast live that image. A Filipino immigrant who had cleaned toilets to support her family, hugging her son who had just taken down a corrupt billionaire CEO using only brains, patience, and a pink bicycle as motivation. That night, the 6 o'clock news opened with footage of Thornton being led from the courtroom in handcuffs, interspersed with the viral photo of him handing the pink bike to Miguel weeks ago. The contrast was devastating. The internet exploded. Bicicleta Rosa became a global trending topic. Memes flooded social media. But beneath the humor, there was a powerful current of anger at systemic injustice and celebration of a man who refused to be a silent victim. Derek Manning resigned the next morning, before investigations officially caught up with him. James Whitmore, the CFO, tried to flee to Mexico but was detained at the Tijuana airport. 3 other executives requested plea bargains. Richard Thornton's carefully constructed empire collapsed in less than 2 weeks, and it all started with a pink bicycle and the arrogance of a man who believed that poor and non-white people existed only to serve, never to observe, document, and destroy. But there was still one last act in this story, a final revelation that would completely transform everything everyone thought they understood about Miguel Santos and his meticulously executed plan. Because while everyone believed they had seen the final blow, Miguel still had an ace up his sleeve, the most devastating of all, and when he threw it on the table, even federal prosecutors would gasp. The true extent of Miguel's plan, the part he had strategically saved for the perfect moment, was about to be revealed. And when that happened, Richard Thornton would realize that his arrest, the destruction of his company, and the collapse of his reputation had been just the beginning of the most calculated and far-reaching revenge the American corporate world had ever witnessed. Because Miguel hadn't just destroyed a man, he was about to completely rewrite the rules about how corrupt executives would be treated from now on, and all thanks to a pink bicycle that an arrogant billionaire thought would be funny to give as a humiliation. 6 months after Richard Thornton's arrest, Thornton Industries was no more, not because it went completely bankrupt, although the $43 million federal fines did irreparable damage, but because the board of directors voted unanimously to voluntarily dissolve the company and redistribute assets among creditors, injured employees, and victims of fraudulent practices. Catherine Walsh personally oversaw this painful but necessary process. 523 employees were reassigned to other companies, many with generous severance packages paid for by the sale of remaining corporate assets. The glass building where it all began was sold to a technology startup founded by 3 Latino entrepreneurs. And Miguel Santos? He turned down the position of vice president, not because I didn't want to, but because he had bigger plans. Santos Logistics International opened its doors in March 2026, occupying a modest but functional office in downtown Los Angeles. The company specializes in optimizing trade routes for small and medium-sized businesses, exactly the ones that giants like Thornton used to exploit or completely ignore. The first client was a cooperative of Filipino immigrants who imported agricultural products. Miguel not only optimized his routes, reducing costs by 38%, but he personally trained the team on how to identify fraudulent contracts and predatory practices. "You deserve the same respect and the same opportunities as any billion-dollar corporation," he said during the first advisory meeting, "and I'm going to make sure they get just that." 6 months later, Santos Logistics had 47 active customers, 14 employees, all hired from historically marginalized communities, and projected annual revenue of $2.5 million. Nothing compared to the numbers Thornton manipulated, but built with absolute integrity. Rosa Santos visited the office every week, bringing homemade lunches for the entire team. "My son has always been special," she said proudly to anyone who wanted to hear. "Even as a child, when I saw injustice, I couldn't keep quiet." Miguel installed something peculiar at his company's reception desk, that ridiculous pink bicycle, mounted on a special stand with a bronze plaque underneath. "Remember, never underestimate anyone based on appearances. The person you humiliate today could be the one who defines your future tomorrow." Miguel Santos, founder. Visitors always asked about that strange bike, and Miguel told the complete story, without omitting any humiliating details. "Because I didn't feel ashamed. I felt power." Richard Thornton, meanwhile, was awaiting trial in a medium-security federal prison. His high-priced lawyers had abandoned the case after it became clear that the evidence Miguel documented was irrefutable. He ended up accepting a plea bargain, handing over information about the entire network of corporate corruption in exchange for just 17 years in prison instead of 45. His Beverly Hills mansion was auctioned off to pay fines. His wife filed for divorce 3 weeks after his arrest, taking the children to another state. His friends at the golf club were no longer answering calls. Derek Manning and James Whitmore also received prison sentences, 9 and 12 years respectively. But the most devastating part for Thornton wasn't the arrest. It was to discover through court documents the true extent of Miguel's plan, because that flash drive Miguel was carrying didn't just contain evidence about Thornton Industries. It contained meticulous documentation on 6 other companies involved in the cartelization and corruption scheme. Miguel had spent 2 years undercover at not 1, but 7 different corporations as an invisible temporary consultant. Each company received its own federal investigation. Every corrupt CEO faced criminal charges. The entire network that they believed to be invisible was systematically exposed, and it all started because an arrogant billionaire decided to publicly humiliate a poor Filipino with a pink children's bicycle. Attorney Morrison included the case in his book on corporate fraud, published a year later. An entire chapter dedicated to what he called the pink bicycle effect, how underestimating people based on prejudice can lead criminals to unwittingly expose their own illegal operations. Miguel Santos wasn't just smart, Morrison wrote. He deeply understood that arrogance fueled by privilege creates enormous blind spots. Thornton literally handed over complete access to his financial systems to the man who would meticulously document every crime because he simply could not conceive that a poor Filipino immigrant could pose any threat. Business universities began using the case as a study in corporate ethics and the dangers of a culture of systematic discrimination. The pink bicycle became an unlikely symbol of intelligent resistance against institutional injustice. Miguel was invited to speak at dozens of events on entrepreneurship, social justice, and combating corporate corruption. I always took photos of the pink bike. Do you know what that bike represents? He asked packed audiences. Not humiliation, motivation. Thornton thought he was putting me in my place. In fact, he was giving me emotional fuel to ensure that every second of the previous 2 years of evidence collection was used to completely destroy his corrupt empire. The talks always ended with the same message. The best revenge is not to lower yourself to the level of those who wronged you. It is to build something so meaningful, so integral, so successful, that they spend the rest of their lives regretting having underestimated you. In the audience at one of these talks was Catherine Walsh, now an independent consultant helping companies identify and eliminate toxic corporate cultures. I should have stood up for you that day in the parking lot, she said to Miguel after the event. This cowardice haunts me. You couldn't, Miguel replied gently. The system was built to protect men like Thornton and silence everyone else. But now we have tools, legal precedents, and stories like mine that show justice is possible. 3 years after the initial humiliation, Miguel Santos was interviewed by the Financial Tribune, the same newspaper that had published the first devastating expose on Thornton. How do you feel knowing that you completely destroyed Richard Thornton's life? Asked the reporter. Miguel thought carefully before responding. I didn't destroy his life. He destroyed his own life through years of crime, corruption, and systematic cruelty. I just documented and exposed what he was already doing. The difference is that he believed that people like me, poor, non-white, inferior, in the world's distorted view of him, would never have the capacity or courage to hold him accountable. Do you have a message for other workers who experience discrimination? 3 things. Miguel counted on his fingers. First, document everything, every offensive email, every discriminatory comment, every wrongdoing. Second, build strategic allies, lawyers, journalists, other employees who witness the same injustice. Third, be patient. Revenge executed in anger is destructive to all. Justice executed with intelligence and solid evidence is transformative. And for people like Richard Thornton, Miguel smiled, that calm smile that had scared Thornton that first day. Remember that the person pushing an old bicycle may be documenting your every criminal move, that the invisible temporary consultant may have an MBA from Wharton and connections to federal prosecutors, that underestimating someone based on social class or ethnicity is not just morally repugnant, it is strategically suicidal. The interview went viral, reaching 23 million views in 72 hours. On the 5-year anniversary of the original humiliation, Miguel organized a special event. It brought together all employees who had been systematically discriminated against or harmed by Thornton and his corrupt corporate practices. 47 people showed up, blacks, Latinos, Asians, immigrants, all with stories of unfairly denied promotions, lower pay for equivalent work, racist comments disguised as jokes. You are not victims, Miguel said before that special audience. You are survivors of a system built to keep us invisible and silent. What now? Now we have companies of our own, leadership roles, amplified voices. Thornton tried to humiliate us. We turned that humiliation into fuel for success. The room erupted in applause. Rosa Santos, sitting in the front row next to Miguel's 2 youngest children, now in college with full scholarships earned through absolute merit, openly wept with pride. That night, Miguel finally allowed himself to revisit that first day, the humiliation in the parking lot, the cruel laughter of the executives, the weight of the ridiculous pink bicycle that he pushed under contemptuous looks. And he realized something fundamental. He didn't hate Richard Thornton. I felt sorry for him, because Thornton had squandered immense privileges, elite education, powerful connections, limitless opportunities, building an empire founded on cruelty and crime. While Miguel, starting with absolutely nothing but intelligence and determination, had built something meaningful and integral. What is true success? Miguel wrote in his diary that night. It's not how much money you accumulate or how many people you control. It's how many lives you improve, how many injustices you correct, how many people who were invisible you help to be seen. The pink bicycle remained at the reception of Santos Logistics International. Children who visited the office with their parents always asked if they could play with her. Miguel always said yes. This bike taught me something important, he explained to the curious children. That objects used to humiliate us can be transformed into symbols of strength, that other people's opinions of us matter much less than our own integrity, and that underestimating someone is the most dangerous mistake you can make. Richard Thornton, serving time at the Federal Correctional Institution in Lompoc, received a copy of the Financial Tribune every week. I saw headlines about the meteoric growth of Miguel's company. I saw photos of that damn pink bicycle being displayed in labor history museums as a symbol of resistance against corporate discrimination. And finally, after 5 years in prison, he understood the lesson that had cost him everything. People are not worth less because they have less. And underestimating someone based on appearances isn't just cruel, it's the quickest way to deliver the tools of your own destruction directly into the hands of those you're trying to humiliate. The story of Miguel Santos and the pink bicycle became legend, not because it was a revenge story, although revenge was certainly part of it, but because it was a story about how intelligence, patience, and absolute integrity will always win over arrogance, unearned privilege, and systematic cruelty. And every time an arrogant executive thought of humiliating an employee he considered inferior, someone would inevitably ask, "Do you remember what happened to Richard Thornton?" This simple question has saved countless people from unnecessary humiliation, and it transformed Miguel Santos, the poor Filipino pushing an old bicycle, into a permanent symbol that justice, when executed with intelligence and irrefutable evidence, is not only possible, it's inevitable. The best revenge is not destroying those who harmed you. It's building something so meaningful that they spend the rest of their lives knowing they completely underestimated the wrong person, and that this underestimation not only destroyed their own lives, but inspired millions of other invisible people to stand up and demand exactly the respect and dignity they have always deserved. If this story of how a pink bicycle became the symbol of the fall of a corrupt empire touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because sometimes the most inspiring stories begin in the most humbling moments and end up proving that intelligence, integrity, and patience will always trump arrogance fueled by prejudice and unearned privilege. Richard Thornton tried to put Miguel Santos in his place with a pink children's bicycle, but he discovered too late that Miguel's true place was exactly where he chose to be, at the top of an empire built on integrity, surrounded by the people he helped prosper, and as a permanent symbol that underestimating someone based on appearances is the quickest path to your own destruction.